I had to get you to stand up one more time before I preach. Stretch your legs out a little bit. So this morning or this afternoon, I want to preach on, we're talking about mostly about families and marriage relationship, raising kids, all those kinds of things. And we've gone into some more kind of practical things. Last week we talked about raising children, and I use it a little bit more of an allegory with lawn maintenance and lawn care. And I don't know, it didn't go over as well as I thought in my mind, which is why I said at the beginning of that message, not my favorite way to preach, but it is something to think about. The amount of tension and care that it goes into raising a child. I mean, it's something that has to be purposeful, and it's something that's going to be hard work, and you got to really put that in there to get those best results. And so I want to move on today to husband-wife relationships, but what I'm going to talk about today will apply to everybody, whether you're married or not. I'll obviously be referencing married couples, but the truth is, in any relationship, this is a possibility that has to do with fighting with one another, having arguments. Okay, they're inevitable. We're all going to have some fighting, and we're all going to have some different things. And so I want to talk specifically about rules of fighting with your spouse. Okay, I want to be that official, in the ring, who's, pushing each other, holding each other back, or saying, hey, that's below the belt, or hey, that's, what I mean? There's going to be some rules when it comes to this. And so I want to look at that. And, everybody's wired a little differently. There's some, I could go around this room and talk to people about, hey, do you fight, whether it's, do you fight with your brother? Do you fight with your parents? Do you fight with your spouse? Do you fight with, and I'm mainly talking about spouses, but again, think about it, just even if you're not married, just think about, hey, how am I in my relationship with my siblings, my relationship with my boss, my relationship with my parents? Because I can pretty much guarantee that's going to trickle down, and when you get married, you're going to respond the same way in many ways, because it's your flesh coming out. So the way that you talk to your parents, the way that you talk to your siblings, you don't think that in time that's going to be even sometimes even magnified with your spouse, because you're with them a lot. And so, or your coworkers or whatever. And so it's something to think about. There's got to be some rules to fighting. And again, everybody's wired differently. If I went around the room and talked about fighting, there are people in here that be like, I really don't fight much with anybody because I hate to fight. And there would be some people who say, like, I don't like to fight, but I end up getting in a lot of fights, it seems like, and I don't know why. What is it about my personality, or what is it about, not being able to control my tongue or something, but it seems like they fight a lot, but they don't like it, they hate it. And then I guarantee you there are people that like to fight. They like stirring up problems, they like to have arguments, they like to have debates, or whatever. And I'll tell you right now, I don't get those people. Like, I just don't understand it. Why wouldn't you want to have peace? And maybe they feel like, hey, no, I'm fine. Like, I'm not, I just like arguing. I like fighting, and I don't understand that, because it's just not my makeup. But everybody is a little bit different. Some people maybe have a little more tendency to do that. So I want to talk about just those rules, just super practical information, nothing real deep or technical. Okay, number one, the best way to stop a fight is to avoid having it in the first place, right? It's the best way to avoid fighting and avoid all that comes with fighting. The anger, the resentment, the actions that follow that. The best way to stop all that from happening is to avoid having the fight to begin with. Look at Proverbs chapter 26. Proverbs chapter 26. And this verse is more specifically about talebearer, but I just want you to notice this first part of it. Where no wood is, there the fire goeth out. Now that's a pretty simple concept, isn't it? Where no wood is, there the fire goes out. Look, if you don't want to have to be putting out fires, if you don't want to have everything burned down, if you don't, the thing is, remove that wood. I've told the story in here. I don't know if everybody in here has heard it, but I've told a story here before about how I almost burnt down this farm that I worked on. And the funny thing is, I didn't realize this until later because, interestingly enough, later I joined up for a volunteer fire department. I think it was that experience that made me think like, I think I could do this. But at the time, one thing started catching on fire, and then another thing caught on fire, and then all this hay was catching on fire, and it was leading to trees, and I was like, oh no, once those trees go on fire, then it's going to catch the other tree on fire, and then next thing you know, it's going to work its way to one of the buildings, and then we got all kinds of trouble. And so I'm running back and forth trying to get water, fill up, the hose wouldn't go far enough, so I'm like putting it in a bucket, and then I run up there, throw the bucket on the fire, and here's what I didn't really think about until sometime later. Like, you really don't have to do all that in that type of a situation. All you really have to do, and I learned this on the volunteer fire department, when there was a huge grass fire, field fire, and they said, okay, I showed up thinking I was going to pour water on the fire, and they gave me a rake. And they said, okay, get inside the fire and rake that grass away from the fire so it won't have anywhere to go. And I remember thinking back, like, that's what I should have done. I was so stressed out thinking I was going to burn the farm down. And so common sense, all I really had to do is start moving stuff. Like, just let that fire burn out, and I remove all this other stuff, then the fire's not going to spread, right? It's an easy concept, but in the heat of the moment, a lot of times we're just trying to get the water, we're trying to grab the hose, we're trying to do all this stuff. And it's like, you know what? If you just remove that wood, you won't have the fire. And when it comes to arguing, it's like that too. If we can just remove those things that are going to cause the fight, you know what I mean? If we could just remove that, then we wouldn't have the problem. So the Bible gives us a couple things. Proverbs 15:1, for instance. You're already in Proverbs, so go back to chapter 15. And remember, we just read James 3. We're talking about somebody who is to be a perfect man. I'm not saying they have arrived, but somebody who has figured this out. It sometimes takes a lifetime of learning, many, many years of practice and putting this into practice. It's not always, it sounds easy to say, but you have to experience it. You have to try it and get out there and put in the work. It says, a soft answer turneth away wrath, but grievous words stir up anger. And you can go on, man, this whole Proverbs is just full of stuff like that. I wanted to keep on reading, but a soft answer turneth away wrath. I can't tell you how many times in my life I have seen that take place. Like, I've seen, like, you know what, somebody's really mad at me. Let's say you're in customer service. If you're in customer service, you either fight with people all the time or you've already learned this rule. Because when you got an angry customer that comes and they're complaining about something, if you can direct that and give them a soft answer, calm them down a little bit. I'm not saying that they're not going to be mad or still say stupid stuff, but you just really deflected a lot of the argument. But if you go in getting defensive, because what happens is when somebody starts, we've all got the fight or flight mechanism, you know what I mean? And we all respond to it a little bit differently, but there's everything in our body says, hey, you better stand your ground, you better get ready, this is going to be a fight. And so when someone says something and you don't like it, it's just like you just like, and that blood rises up in you or whatever, and everything within you wants to defend yourself or it wants to, stand up. So if somebody comes in, complaining about, I don't know, maybe you're making hamburgers and they come in and they're like, hey, somebody forgot to put the meat on my burger. That happens. Have you ever had something crazy like that happen? Valerie ordered one time a taco salad and they forgot lettuce. It's like, isn't that a big part of a salad? Is lettuce? Can you imagine ordering a hamburger and it doesn't have the meat on it? And you ever try to go back into a place like that to tell them they messed up? And people don't like to hear you say that they messed up, so they get real defensive. It's like, are you sure? Are you sure? No, I'm just, going around trying to steal people's steal hamburgers from the, of course I'm sure you didn't put meat on this burger. But, just by going to somebody and saying like, hey, I think you did me wrong, all that person has to do to put that fire out is number one, just say, just take it, say, hey, I'm sorry, here's your order, or softly have a conversation or something like that. That was a bad example, okay, about the hamburgers. I've never even worked in that industry, but you see what I'm saying? A soft answer turns away wrath. And so in my marriage, I am one of those people that would say we don't fight a lot. Okay, my wife and I don't have a lot of fights. And I've often said, if you come by my front door, because we have a lot of people that walk down our street, and I guarantee they hear sometimes, think, hey, they're fighting in there. If you walk by our front door and you hear loud talking, that's not fighting, okay? That's not fighting, that's just how we talk at our house. If we're fighting in our house, my wife is silent. And something's not right. Okay, something's not right. Because we don't fight. We're not the kind that just will keep on arguing and fighting like that, calling each other names and all that. For whatever reason, like we've learned not to do that. And so we don't do that, don't want to do that. And some people do. Some people do. But I do know this, that if I start feeling that, if it's going to happen, here's what's usually going to happen in the car. Who's all driven with me when I'm trying to go somewhere? And I sent some of the guys went camping the other day, and I told them about this lake that I've been to a bunch of times. And I was like, oh yeah, I'll tell you how to get there. And I gave them really specific instructions to a different lake. Right? I'm really bad at instructions. Thankfully, they know better, and they didn't listen to me anyway, so they found it. Okay, but when we first started this work, and we started soul winning, I'm the pastor, so everyone's looking to me, and I'm just like, I'm going to just tell you right now, all right, I'm delegating this because you don't want me giving directions. Now, I can tell you how to get to heaven, okay, but I can't tell you how to get around Kansas City. But anyway, and so if it's going to happen, and my wife and I are going to get heated, it's probably going to be in the car because I'm not listening to instructions, and she's trying to tell me how to get somewhere. I didn't hear her. Now I can't get over because the car's, in my blind spot, and she's mad because she thinks I'm not listening to her. And so then I will respond with a loud, I know, or something like that. And then all of a sudden it's just like, okay, now we're going to have it back. So at some point I got to say, you know what, to avoid this and to remove that wood so we don't have an argument, I'm going to have a soft answer, and I'm going to have to apologize. Or she could do that too, but most of the time it's going to be me. I'm just telling you. It got real quiet in here. You think that she's mad at me for saying that? She's not. Are you mad at me? Most of the time, that's just true. That's just true. I'm going to say, hey, I can diffuse this whole situation. No problem. Here's the thing. Okay, using that example, I know I'm bad at directions. I know that she was just trying to help me get somewhere. You know what I mean? So what's the point of me trying to defend myself? I'm like, you're right, I should have listened to you. You see what I'm saying? So it's okay for us to say, I'm going to just diffuse this situation. The best way to avoid having that fight is the best way to stop the fight is to avoid having it in the first place, is what I'm getting at, okay? And so another thing I would say is to avoid those things, those triggers, if you will. Avoid those things that you know is going to make that person mad. And here's the thing, if you grew up with somebody, if you are like siblings, my kids, I'm sure, know how to push that button. You know what I mean? Everyone that has kids or you have siblings, you know how that button that you could push that's going to make your sibling so upset. And husbands and wives, you know that too. You know what that thing is that you're going to say or that thing is that you're going to do, and it's not going to go over well. Now, I remember observing this as a kid. My mom and dad would get in fights like most moms and dads get in fights, and I would think, ooh, he shouldn't have said that. Ooh, he shouldn't have did that. Somebody slams the door. I'm like, uh-oh. The next sound I hear is going to be somebody getting mad, right? Because I learned, like, hey, you diffuse this situation because that is going to push a button and make somebody mad. And we're all humans here. We're just having this conversation, all right? Because we know that it's true. We've all got these little triggers, something that somebody can say or do, and it's going to make you mad. So here's the answer as a Christian trying to diffuse a situation. Don't say those things. Don't do those things. Okay? And you're going to avoid the fight. You say, well, you just sound like a wimp. All right. I'm just going to tell you, there are things that I could do. I'm strong enough to do. I'm witty enough to do. I could say these things. But what's the point? What's the point? I'll tell you who's strong is the person that can control. It's called meekness, okay? You could do something, but you control that and say, you know what? I'm just going to not do this because I'm going to control the outcome of this situation by stopping. That's not weakness, okay? And so a lot of people, I think that's part of this thing is, well, I'm not going to go down like this. I don't know if it's society teaches us this or what, but it's like, I'm not going to go down like this. You know, I'm going to have the last word, or I'm going to defend myself or whatever. Like, all you're doing is throwing more wood on the fire. And it's not really the wisest thing to do. It's not the most godly thing to do. Now, we're all humans. Again, none of us here are perfect. I got a suspicion that all of us can fall into all this stuff I'm talking about. Okay, and go to 1 Peter. We've read this before. Because when it comes to loving your spouse, I can't reiterate this verse enough. And this is more written from the direction of this is the husband's responsibility, okay? And the text tells you why it's the husband's responsibility. 1 Peter 3:7. Likewise, ye husbands, dwell with them, your wives, according to knowledge, giving honor unto your wife, unto the wife, as unto the weaker vessel, and as being heirs together of the grace of life, that your prayers be not hindered. Okay, now I could preach a lot about the prayers being hindered. And look, when you're at odds with your Christian brother or sister, when you're at odds with your parents, when you're at odds, husbands, wives, so you're at odds with one another, your prayers are going to be hindered. You know, the Bible says that you shouldn't even bring your sacrifice to the altar. You know, if you're at odds with your brother, it says just leave your gift there, go make things right with your brother, and then come back and finish giving your gift, because God's not interested. You know, He wants a contrite heart, contrite spirit. He wants you to get that right and have a good heart before you come to Him thinking that you're going to give something to Him or ask something from Him. No, your prayers are going to be hindered if your relationship with others is not right. That's just the reality of it. But notice in that verse, he said a couple things there. He said, husbands, dwell with your wives according to knowledge. Now, this is not hard to understand. If you love somebody, you have to understand them. You have to know what this person thinks and what they, if it's your friend, you know, I've been friends with this person for many years, and they say like, well, what's their favorite food? I don't know. Well, what kind of a friend are you? You seem like after that many years you would know. And with a spouse, other than the fact that they don't ever tell you where they want to eat, you know, your wife's your best friend, and you should know what her favorite food is. You know, you should dwell with her according to knowledge. I know not to say, hey, where do you want to go to eat? Because I know she's not going to tell me. And so I might ask, and then I'll be like, how about Mexican? I like Mexican. You want Mexican? I know it's going to be good every time. Right? So anyway, what I'm getting at is dwell with your wife according to knowledge. But in this verse, that's the responsibility of the husband. Now, wives, you know, obviously you need to understand your husbands, know your husbands too. But why? Why is it their responsibility? Because the husband's the head of the house. He's the stronger person. It says right there in the text, honoring your wife as the weaker vessel. Okay, that's she's a little more fragile. She's a little bit more, I would say, even emotional. I don't want to say emotionally unstable. That doesn't sound fair. But emotionally weaker, you know. And so the husband should be the one who God's given the strength and the ability to say, you know what, I know what's going to make her mad, so I'm not going to push that button, you know, because I don't want her to be mad. One comedian said, happy wife, happy life. Now, with that being said, because I know what some people are thinking, you know, are you just saying your wife should be able to do whatever she wants? No. If you're the husband, head of your household, sure, there are times where you have to say, like, I know you're not going to like to do this, but this is what we're going to do. I know that this isn't the decision that you think that we should make, but this is the decision I'm making. And being a husband requires making those stands and making those statements, but that doesn't mean just because you avoid arguments that you're weak. You see what I'm saying? Maybe you're the strong one that's keeping order in the house and keeping things, keeping everybody happy and peaceful. This is all in the Bible. This is a lot of stuff. It's very practical stuff, but it's very helpful. Okay, so number one, we've already talked about just trying to avoid the fight. That's going to be huge if you can do that. And again, we're talking about going on to perfection. All the verses in the Bible that talk about going towards perfection. There's a lot of things like how about add to your faith virtue, and the virtue knowledge, and the knowledge temperance, and you got all these stuff, brotherly kindness, godliness, and then you got charity, right? And then it says that you may be, I don't remember if it uses the word perfect or not, but talking about being fruitful, being mature. And so man, you got to add all these things, keeping all these things in mind, and then just the experience of trying these over and over and over. Young Christians or people just got saved and just serving the Lord or whatever, and they get married, yeah, it's probably going to be a little more difficult than somebody who kind of grew up putting these things into practices, hearing preaching about it, and seeing this done. But the second thing I want to point out is this. It takes two, it's building off of that. It's kind of along the same lines, but it takes two to keep the fight going. You know what I mean? Maybe you didn't put out the fire. Maybe you didn't remove the wood, so to speak. Maybe there's tension, and then you got in the flesh, and so you kind of start yelling back, and next thing you know, there's fight. That thing will go all night if you'll let it, until somebody eventually does something to put a stop to it. It takes two people to keep that going. And so what I want to suggest is that, again, I'm not even going to say on this time that it's the man's, I'm not going to point out to the man saying it's primarily your responsibility, but look, everybody should be able to think about this. When you're in a fight with somebody, the word that keeps coming to mind is to absorb, okay? And I was thinking like a sponge. If somebody is if somebody is pouring out, I think I got two sponges in my hand, okay? One's just full of water, and it's just overflowing, and it starts getting onto the other sponge, and that sponge now soaks all that up and absorbs all that moisture. But if he just pours all that right back into the first sponge, then there's just this never-ending thing, right? But we have to, as Christians, learn how to absorb someone else's anger, somebody else's faults, somebody else's even sins sometimes. We need to absorb that. Okay, and let me show you what I'm talking about. Turn to Galatians 6. Galatians chapter 6. And again, this applies to husbands and wives, but this is good practical information for all of us in any relationship. But here's what it says in Galatians chapter 6. Brethren, if a man be overtaken in a fault, ye which are spiritual, restore such an one in the spirit of meekness, considering thyself, lest thou also be tempted. Bear ye one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. For if a man think himself to be something when he's nothing, he deceiveth himself. But let every man prove his own work, and then shall he have rejoicing in himself alone, and not in another, for every man shall bear his own burdens. I love how it says it both ways in that text. It says, bear one another's burdens, and then it says, every man shall bear his own burdens. And here's what I think about whenever I read that, it's my job as a Christian, as a child of God, to think about myself in terms of, I'm not going around judging everybody else whenever I've got a beam sticking out of my eye, right? I'm not going around trying to find everyone else's faults. I'm concerned about making sure that I'm trying to live holy, and I'm trying to do righteous. I'm trying to serve the Lord and have all the responsibility I'm supposed to have. Okay, but along the lines, you come in contact with somebody else, and this person has committed some kind of fault. They've got some kind of fault. They've done something wrong, and maybe in the sense of an argument, they've just had a bad day, and they're allowing that to get to them, and that wrath is turning into something sinful, and they're trying to take it out on you or something like that. Hey, same situation. That's your brother or sister in Christ, or your husband and wife, whatever, but they've come to you now, and they're in a fault, right? But you're kind of understanding that, number one, hey, whenever I have bad days, guess what? I might do the same thing. You know what I mean? And so what you're thinking right now is, hey, I want to do right before God, but right now they're having a bad day. They're doing something wrong. Look, I'm going to try to absorb that a little bit. Not because I'm accountable for what they do in their life. I'm accountable for what I do in my life. But knowing that, hey, I've been like that before too, let me just go ahead and tolerate that. Let me put up with that. Let me provide a little buffer or something like that so that they can recognize that they were wrong and they can get back to serving the Lord. Why should I then, start butting heads and start making a big deal about something whenever, I could have easily been offended and done the same thing as well. So I believe a good word there to use would be to absorb. All right, whenever there's tension of any kind, there's something like that, absorb the situation. Go ahead and be willing to take harm, to take loss, you know what I mean? To smooth out the situation a little bit. I don't know if I've probably shared this because it's a story I like to share, and every time I share it, it seems like people think that was a weird thing to share. Okay, but it means something to me, and maybe you can understand this. Because as a little kid, I realized what I just did in the story I'm about to tell you was a demonstration of love, but it seemed so weird and counterintuitive, okay? I was out with my friend. We were like 8 years old. This is the friend that took me to church, the church that I got saved at. And we had jars, and we were catching bees. Don't do that, kids, okay? Not smart. I mean, you can go ahead and do it if you want to. I don't care. It builds character. but be ready to get stung, all right? And we would take the jars, and we wait till the bee landed on a clover or whatever, and we would put it on that, and then real quickly put the lid on there and on the jar and lock it up. And my friend, wasn't fast enough or whatever. The bee got out and stung him, and he started crying. And when he started crying, it was a real tense situation because, he was looking at me. Here we are, boys. We're not supposed to be crying. I know now there's a generation being raised that maybe isn't quite the same. But back in those days, boys didn't cry. They didn't want to cry in front of each other. And so he's crying, and he's crying like it's an ugly cry. You know what I'm talking about? It's like an embarrassing, ugly cry. And I'm sitting there like, what am I going to do? I could laugh at him and say, hey, you look funny when you cry like that. That wouldn't be love. You know what I mean? I could, just be heartless and not care about the fact that he's hurt because a bee stung, whatever. And so I said, what can I do? And so this is ridiculous, okay? Here's what I did. I reached out and caught a bee with my hand and let it sting me. So that I could be hurting too. And he stopped crying and he looked at me like, that was stupid. But I did. I absorbed some of that awkward tension and pain. And now we're both hurting. And I didn't cry. And so he was like, okay. And we just went back to playing. And I remember thinking like later on, maybe bragging on myself a little too much, I don't know. But I remember thinking later on, like, that was a loving thing to do. It was stupid, but it was a loving thing to do. I was like, man, I want to hurt too. You know what I mean? And I believe that's what it's like when you love somebody and you see them, fall into a sin, or you see them behaving in a way that's not becoming of a Christian, or you see somebody, they let their anger get to them and they sin. Now, I'm not saying, just let people sin and there's no judgment. Obviously there are times we have to hold people accountable. There are times that actions need to be taken because of somebody's sin to get them back on track or whatever. But in the moment, when it comes to arguing and stuff like that, what happens is someone did you wrong, and so you immediately just think like, well, that's not right, and then you just end up usually doing wrong also, and now you're both doing wrong. You see what I mean? And so if you can get this mindset that, hey, I love this person, they're going to regret what they just did or what they just said later on. And so I'm just going to make it a little bit easier on them by just diffusing the situation and being that person who makes it stop. Because it takes two people, to keep the argument going or the fight going. But here's what you don't want to do. Once you've not been able to avoid the fight, it's come to you, maybe you've gotten in the flesh, and maybe you've even started, all right, I'm going to go down this road, I'm going to defend myself, or whatever the case is. We've got to be very careful that we control our tongues, okay? I remember hearing a Sunday school teacher, and I guess I've heard it a lot since then, but the first time I heard it was my Sunday school teacher in Springfield. And he said, like, he had a tube of toothpaste, and he squeezed that toothpaste out, and he said, now, you know what? I can't get that toothpaste back in the tube, right? It's already gone. And he's like, when we say certain things and it comes out of our mouth, there's no way to get that back into our mouth. You know what I mean? It's already out there. It's already done the damage. I know there's got to be somebody in here thinking about, well, I think I could get it back in the tube if I did this or this. You understand what I'm saying, right? It's better not to squeeze the tube until you're ready, until it needs to be squeezed. Okay, so we need to control our tongue. Go back to James again. And he said that if we could offend not in word, in other words, controlling our tongue, the same as a perfect man, able also to bridle the whole body. Behold, we put bits in the horses' mouths that they may obey us, and we turn about their whole body. Behold also the ships, which though they be so great, are driven of fierce winds, yet they are turned about with a very small helm, whithersoever the governor listeth. Even so the tongue is a little member and boasteth great things. Behold, how great a matter a little fire kindleth. And the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. So is the tongue amongst our members, that it defileth the whole body, and setteth on fire the course of nature, and is set on the fire of hell. For every kind of beast, and of bird, and of serpents, and of things in the sea, is tamed, and hath been tamed of mankind, but the tongue can no man tame. It is an unruly evil, full of deadly poison. Therewith we bless we God, even the Father, and therewith curse we men, which are made after the similitude of God. Out of the same mouth proceed blessing and cursing. My brethren, these things ought not so to be. Doth the fountain send forth at the same place sweet water and bitter? Can a fig tree, my brethren, bear olive berries, either a vine figs? So can no fountain both yield salt water and fresh? Who is a wise man, endued with knowledge amongst you? Let him show of a good conversation his works with meekness and wisdom. But if ye have bitter envying and strife in your hearts, glory not, and lie not against the truth. This wisdom descendeth not from above, but is earthly, sensual, devilish. For where envying and strife is, there is confusion in every evil work. But the wisdom that is from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, and easy to be entreated, full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality and without hypocrisy. And the fruit of the righteous is sown in peace of them that make peace. Isn't that a great chapter? It's one that we should strive to follow and say, you know what? Hey, I want to be able to control the whole body. I want to also be able to control that tongue. And just like that big ship that's turned around by that little rudder, you can steer the whole ship just by being able to control that little rudder. I want to be able to control my tongue in that way. All right, so it's best if you can avoid fighting at all, but the reality is there's going to be fights. That's just human nature. In every relationship, there's going to be those times. And when that happens, then it takes two to keep it going. So one of us is going to have to decide, hey, you know what, I'm going to put an end to this, and I'm going to control my tongue. Soft answer turneth away wrath, all these kinds of things. But here's the third point that I want to make is this: resolve it quickly. Resolve it quickly, because fights are going to happen. And sometimes the fight, so sometimes here's what will happen. Based on what I've said so far, you'll think, okay, well, I'm just going to stop this fight. And so I'm just not going to say anything, or I'm going to leave the room, or I'm going to go take a breath or whatever. And it never actually got resolved. You know what I'm saying? The fight didn't get resolved. It just was like put on hold. And so the next time you come together, it's going to be either on the back of everyone's mind, or it's just going to all of a sudden resurface. And every time you see each other, it's like, and another thing. You know, and it's just going to keep coming back, and it's never going to be resolved. So the reality, as I'm not saying, you know, once there's a fight, once there's been something, hey, why do you do this? Why do you know, then it has to be resolved in order for you to move on. Now, I'm going to tell you this as a man, and I'm thinking probably most men here are in the same boat. It's a lot easier for us, I think, typically, to be like, you know what, it's all right, it's over, it's done. I don't want to fight anymore. It's the fight's over, you know. And a lot of times the women are like, what? It's not done. It can't be done. They want to see something, and you're just like, I just want to sleep. Like, you know, for me, you know, when we've had Valerie and I had any discussions, and it's kind of got into something, hey, this needs to be resolved, and something needs to be done. A lot of times it's at night or some kind of inconvenient time, and I'm thinking, oh man, really, I don't want to do that right now. But guess what? If you love your wife and you want to resolve this thing, it's got to be resolved. It's got to be resolved. And so you might lose some sleep, or you might have to do something at an inconvenient time when you don't want to do it. But if you resolve it, that's going to take care of that situation. Okay. And so let's go to a great verse as well, Ephesians chapter 4. They're all great verses, right? Resolve it quickly. I want to clarify this. And I think everybody in here gets this, but if I were to ask most people, is anger a sin? Most people would say yes, okay? But we know anger is not a sin because God gets angry. And so anger is not a sin. Jealousy, if we say, is it a sin to be jealous? A lot of people say, oh, yes, it's a sin. Now, I guess it depends on how you define it. There's envy, and then there's jealous, you know, there's being envious, and there's being jealous. You know, but the reality is God's a jealous God. And it's okay to be jealous. Like if I saw my wife with another man, I would be jealous. And that would be okay. I would have every right to be jealous. So when the Bible talks about being angry and sin coming from that, it's not the fact that you got angry, it's what you did with that anger. Okay? Same as jealousy and a whole lot of other emotions. You know, it's not so much that you had that feeling and thought, hey, something needs to be done about this feeling, but it's what the course of action that you take that becomes sinful. And so the Bible says here in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 26, be ye angry. It's not a command telling you that you have to be angry. Okay, read the whole thing. Be ye angry and sin not. So when you are angry, because that's all right, that's normal, and it's got to come. There's things that are going to make you angry. You know, be angry and sin not. You know, don't let that become something that's sinful. And then it goes on to say something interesting, but this is the point that I want to bring up. Let not the sun go down upon thy wrath. Now, what does that mean? Let not the sun go down. Well, it means get it done before it's the next day. You know, the sun's going down. Let's get this thing resolved. Let's get it done. Okay, so you're angry about something. Go ahead. The Bible says if somebody's done you wrong, you know, go to that person, go to that brother and talk to them about it. And same, obvious husband and wife, same thing. But anybody, any relationship, you know, go to them if they've done you wrong and you can't let it go, you know, go to them. Now, here's the thing. If you haven't gone to them, realize this, that they probably don't even know that it's bothering you. A lot of times you get mad at somebody and you just like holding a grudge, and they don't even know that you're mad at them. You know, or maybe they sense that something's wrong, but they don't know what it is or whatever. The only way it's ever going to get resolved is if you go to them and you talk to them. Okay, and so the opposite is the Bible also talks about if you know that your brother has aught against you, right? In the occasion that you do find out, oh, I made so-and-so mad. I didn't know that. Well, if the same thing's true, go to them. Say, hey, I'm sorry if I made you mad. Can we talk about it or whatever? So we're saying that, yes, if it's better just to not have a fight, okay? But having a fight is a little bit different than having an issue that needs to be resolved, okay? So whatever it is, find a way to not fight and be heated and be mad anymore, but let's resolve the problem. Otherwise, you know what it's going to be? Another argument down the road. And next thing you know, there's going to be 2 or 3 unsolved arguments, that is going to all merge into one argument. And all of a sudden, these arguments are going to get nasty. And these fights are going to get huge. And there's going to be so much dirt to uncover. And it's going to come out in the wrong time. You talk about saying something you wish you could take back. You're going to hold something over their head. And you're going to remember this argument you had a long time ago. And you're going to start saying something. And it's going to be bad. All because we didn't solve those problems whenever they came. And so resolving it is important. It needs to be resolved, in fact, as soon as we can. Because if we leave it and say, hey, you know what, we'll talk about this again tomorrow, you might not. You might not. It might come at the worst time. The next time you talk about it might be in another argument, and then it's not ever going to get resolved. And so you have to find some way of resolving it. Now, that doesn't mean every single fight that you have can be resolved in a day, of course, right? So let me tell you a way to bring a little bit of closure to an argument. Even if it's not completely settled, you can still settle it enough to have that argument resolved for the day, okay? And I would say this. Here is a huge thing, let not the sun go down upon your wrath. I would say this. Here's a more layman's terms, I guess. Don't go to bed angry. You know what I mean? All right, so here's one thing I would say, and I don't believe this doghouse. Don't any guy ever sleep on the couch, okay? Go get it taken care of and then sleep in your bed. All right? Don't go in the doghouse, whatever that means, but don't do it. Resolve it. And you say, well, how do I resolve it if it's something that it's not going to be taken care of overnight or whatever? I would say here is how you know that this kind of an argument is resolved in a married relationship. When you can affirm with one another that you still love each other and you're not mad at each other and everything is good. Are we good? Are we okay? Are we on the right page? When you have established that and you can go to bed and sleep and say, you know what, we will take care of this tomorrow. But we love each other and then everything is going to be good. And so reaffirm your love. And let me just give a couple other that everybody needs to hear. Every married person needs to hear, okay? And you need to know, I know we got one couple getting ready to get married. Go into your marriage like this. Divorce is never an option. I'm never going to threaten them with divorce. I'm never going to say those kinds of things, okay? And if it ever comes out of your mouth, immediately you need to take it back and say, no, I didn't mean that. That was stupid. And that's not even an option because we love each other. And now you have put some closure on that. Said, okay, now it was a dumb thing to say, but it was said. But now we've reaffirmed that we love each other. And you know what I'm saying? So you can resolve an argument without having a complete, fulfillment of whatever it is that you're fighting about. Because some of those things, I'm never going to get better at direction. So my wife and I are never going to be able to get that one, settled. But we can, if we say something that we regret, we can fix that right there and have it resolved in a manner of speaking. You know what I'm saying? We can take care of that one time where somebody says something, gets mad. I hope you're following what I'm trying to say. Okay? And then I would throw this in there as well. Again, as a kid growing up, every kid, I was a youth pastor. I heard tons of kids tell me this, that their mom and dad fought all the time, like cats and dogs, and there was a lot of yelling and there was fighting. And I'll tell you this, that sticks with the kid. You don't even know it, but it's emotional for that child. And they're sitting there trying to sleep at night, and you think that, hey, you're having a hard time sleeping because of that time sleeping too, because they're listening to mom and dad fight. And so I would say another way to provide some closure and resolve that argument would be to reaffirm with your kids. Mommy and daddy love each other. Okay, this is something parents do, something people do. Hey, don't you fight with your brother and sister. Like, we don't want to do it. We want to get better at it. But it is something that we do, and we're sorry if that scared you or made you mad or whatever. I think that would be a responsible thing to do as a parent and as a husband or wife. And then I'll just close with this one. I don't have any real verses to take you to, whatever, but the final thing I would say is when a fight is resolved, here would be a good rule. Try everything in your power not to bring it up again. Now, obviously, sometimes damage is done in such a way that you're never going to forget something, but don't bring it up again. And we've already resolved that. We've taken care of that. Let's only, if we're going to fight or have some kind of, something that needs to be taken care of, let's just take care of that thing that we're working on right now. Let's not throw something else into it. That's why we resolved that, so that we don't have to do that. And I think if you can do that, it will be a way to keep the house from burning down, so to speak. Keep you from being able to get these done, and just minimize those two smaller fires and remove as much fuel as you can, and then just put out that fire. Okay, and these are just some practical rules, some practical things that the Bible just gives a lot of practical information like that. It's not super spiritual, it's just common sense in some ways, but also something that as children of God, having the fruit of the Spirit, having the Holy Spirit within us, we should be producing the fruit of the Spirit. And so therefore, when the world sees our marriage, they shouldn't say like, man, those guys are Christians, but man, their marriage is just like hanging on the thread, Or some kid, I know he's a Christian, but I heard that kid talk about how their mom and dad fight all the time, and all those things. Like, no, there's more than just practical, like this is just something that everybody should want. As a Christian, it is our responsibility to produce fruit, and the fruits of the Spirit are love, peace, joy, and so these are the things that we should work on, and we should be able to resolve. And again, I'm primarily focused on husband and wives, but this is every relationship, siblings, parent, kids and parents, co-workers. If you find yourself getting into a lot of fights and having a lot of stress because of those fights or whatever, there's probably some steps that you need to take to minimize that, because that's a huge deal, and it can be done. All right, you can resolve those. All right, let's pray. Father, thank you for your word, and I thank you for all the relationships that we're involved in, and I can't even imagine how many people we come in contact with in one way or another, just in this small group of people here, and all of the people that we talk to, and the relationships that we have, parents and extended family and co-workers and all that, Lord. I pray that you'll help us to maintain good, peaceful relationships, and help us, Lord, when we are angry or jealous or any of these things, that we would control that before it becomes anything that's sinful, and we would get matters taken care of, Lord, so that we can go on to produce more fruit for you and to be productive Christians, and not be hindered by the things that are carnal things. But we do know that we have a responsibility to work on those carnal things, and they will help our bodies to just be honorable vessels for you, Lord, that you can use, that are fit for the Master's use. I pray, Lord, that you help us now do that, be glorified in all that we do. Bless those who are going out soul winning. Lord, I pray that you'll fill them with your Spirit and help them to boldly and happily go take your word and share it around the neighborhood. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.